She thought she had already won. I could picture it, my daughter-in-law, Renata, standing in the marble foyer of the house my son built, holding a glass of something expensive, already redecorating in her mind, already erasing him, already erasing me. But she hadn't read the documents carefully enough. People who are in a hurry to take what isn't theirs rarely do. My name is Arthur Calloway. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, designing bridges that still stand across 4 states. I know how things hold together. I know, better than most, exactly where the cracks are hiding and how long it takes for them to split wide open. This is the story of how my son, even after he was gone, built one last structure that nothing could knock down. My son's name was Daniel. He was 38 when he died. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that gives you almost no warning and absolutely no mercy. From diagnosis to the end, we had 11 weeks. 11 weeks to say everything we hadn't said in 38 years, to sit beside each other in hospital rooms that smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent light, to watch a man who had once run marathons become someone who needed help walking to the bathroom. Daniel had built a logistics software company from a spare bedroom in Nashville. By the time he was 34, that company had 42 employees and contracts with 3 regional hospital networks. He was not flashy about money. He drove a used Ford F-150 and kept a vegetable garden in the backyard of the house he bought in Franklin, Tennessee. A beautiful property, 4 acres, with a creek running along the eastern edge and a workshop in the back where he built furniture on weekends. He met Renata at a charity gala 5 years before he died. She was in marketing consulting at the time, polished and articulate and very good at reading a room. I remember the first time he brought her to my house in Murfreesboro. She complimented everything: my cooking, my woodworking, the photographs on the walls. My late wife Eleanor would have said, "Watch the ones who work too hard to make you like them." Eleanor had a gift for that kind of clarity. I missed it more than I can say. Daniel married Renata 14 months after they met. I was his best man. I smiled in every photograph. I meant most of it. The cancer appeared in January. By February, Daniel had told Renata, told me, and told his attorney, a quiet, methodical man named Gerald Fitch, who had handled Daniel's business affairs for 6 years. I didn't know, at the time, everything that Daniel told Gerald. I would find out later. I would find out that my son, in the middle of losing his life, had been thinking with extraordinary precision about what would happen after. What I knew then was that Renata changed when the diagnosis came. It wasn't obvious at first. She was attentive in the hospital. She brought Daniel things he asked for. But there was a quality to her attentiveness that I noticed: the way she always seemed to be calculating something just behind her eyes, the way she asked the doctors questions that were less about his comfort and more about timelines. Once, in the hallway outside his room, I heard her on the phone with someone I didn't recognize. She was speaking quietly, but I caught the words "once everything is settled and the property alone is worth" before she noticed me and ended the call. I said nothing to Daniel. He was fighting hard enough already. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself grief makes people strange. He died on a Thursday evening in March, with the window cracked open and the smell of early spring coming through. I held his hand. Renata was on the other side of the bed. We did not look at each other. The funeral was on a Saturday. By Sunday night, Renata had changed the security code on the Franklin house. I discovered this when I drove over Monday morning to collect some of Daniel's personal items. He had asked me to take care of a box of his mother's jewelry, a set of architectural drawings he'd made in college, 2 journals he'd kept since his 20s. He had told me, in one of our last conversations, that those journals were mine to keep. I punched in the code I had always used. The panel beeped 3 times and flashed red. I rang the doorbell. Renata answered in a silk robe, holding a coffee mug, looking entirely unsurprised to see me. "Arthur," she said. My name in her mouth had always sounded like a small inconvenience. "I came for Daniel's things," I said. "The items he asked me to take." She tilted her head. "I'm going to need some time to go through everything before anything leaves the house. You understand. Estate matters." "These aren't estate matters," I said. He specifically asked me. "I'm the executor of the estate, Arthur." She said it gently, The way you might explain something to someone very old or very slow. Everything in this house is part of the estate until the process is complete. I'm sure you understand. I understood. I understood something much larger than she realized in that moment. I asked if I could at least come in and sit for a while, in the house where my son had lived. She said it wasn't a great time. She closed the door. I stood on that porch for a moment, looking at the wood grain, remembering that Daniel and I had refinished it together 3 summers ago. We'd spent an entire Saturday on our hands and knees with sandpaper and stain. He'd burned the back of his hand on the heat gun, and we'd laughed about it for an hour. I walked back to my truck. I sat in the driveway for a long moment. Then I drove home, and I called Gerald Fitch. Gerald was exactly as I remembered him, careful, measured, with the demeanor of a man who had seen enough human behavior to be unsurprised by most of it. He asked me to come to his office that Thursday for the formal reading of the will. I told him what had happened at the house. There was a pause on the line. Then Gerald said, "Arthur, I think you should come Thursday and simply listen. Don't say anything to Renata before then. Don't ask her for anything. Don't explain anything." Something in his voice made me sit up straighter. "Gerald," I said, "is there something I should know?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Daniel was very thorough," he said. "Come Thursday." Renata was already seated when I arrived at Gerald's office. She had brought a woman I didn't recognize, introduced as her personal attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s named Miss Breck. Renata herself was dressed in expensive dark clothing that managed to suggest mourning while also suggesting power. She gave me a brief, professional nod when I sat down. The kind of nod you give someone you've already mentally dismissed. Gerald set a folder on the desk. He thanked us both for coming. He offered water. Then he began. Daniel's will was a comprehensive document, 43 pages long. Gerald had clearly prepared for this meeting because he moved through it with quiet efficiency, pausing at key sections to ensure clarity. Renata received the investment portfolio, approximately $2.3 million, across several accounts. She received the joint bank accounts, which held another $400,000. She received Daniel's vehicle, his personal belongings, and his collection of woodworking tools. Miss Breck was taking notes, looking satisfied. Then Gerald turned to the next section. The Franklin property, 4 acres, the house, the workshop, the creek, had been held in a family trust established 3 years prior. The trust's primary beneficiary and sole trustee upon Daniel's death was me. Renata's pen stopped moving. Gerald continued. Daniel's company, which he had transferred into a separate business trust 18 months before his diagnosis, a timing that was, Gerald noted quietly, entirely legal and properly documented, had been structured so that controlling interest passed to a board of 3 people upon Daniel's death. I was one. Gerald was one. Daniel's college roommate and longest tenured employee, a man named Paul Whitfield, was the 3rd. Renata held a minority stake enough to receive dividend income, not enough to control or liquidate anything. Miss Breck leaned over and said something quietly to Renata. Renata said, also quietly, "That can't be right." Gerald looked at her over his glasses. "I assure you it is. He never told me about a family trust on the property." "He wasn't required to," Gerald said. "The property was titled in the trust's name, not jointly. You signed the prenuptial agreement in year 1 of the marriage, which acknowledged the existence of prior assets held in trust. Page 9, paragraph 4. The color in Renata's face did something complicated. I said nothing. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I thought about my son in that hospital room, 11 weeks, still planning, still building things that would last. Renata did not faint. I want to be accurate about that. What she did was go completely still for approximately 10 seconds, the stillness of a person whose entire internal calculation has just been shown to be wrong, and then she collected herself with the practiced composure of someone who had been in difficult rooms before. She and Miss Breck requested copies of all documents. Gerald provided them. The meeting ended with professional courtesy on all sides. In the parking lot, Renata caught up to me before I reached my truck. "Arthur," no longer the dismissive nod. "Something different now. I think we should talk." "All right," I said. "I know we've had our differences." She paused. "I was grieving. The way I handled things at the house, I wasn't in a good place. I think going forward, with everything being what it is, We could find a way to come to an arrangement that works for both of us. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the Sunday night she changed the door code. I thought about the phone call in the hospital hallway. I thought about my son, on his last good day, taking my hand and telling me, "Dad, I made sure you'll be okay." "Renata," I said, "you're welcome to pursue whatever legal avenues you believe are available to you. Gerald's contact information is on the documents." I got in my truck. She stood in the parking lot and watched me leave. What happened over the following 3 months, I'll tell you plainly. Renata hired Mies Breck and a second attorney to challenge the trust. Their argument was that Daniel had structured the trust with intent to deceive her, that she hadn't understood what she was signing in the prenuptial agreement. It was not an unreasonable legal strategy. These things sometimes work. It didn't work here. Gerald had been meticulous. The prenuptial agreement had been reviewed by an independent attorney. Renata hired herself before signing documented. The trust had been established 3 years before the diagnosis, removing any argument about deathbed arrangements. Every transfer had been filed properly, reported properly, witnessed properly. Daniel had understood, even at 35, that the things worth protecting need to be protected before you need to protect them. The challenge was dismissed. During those 3 months, I moved back into the Franklin house, my house, as it turned out, and I began the work of settling into a life I hadn't expected to be living. I planted the rest of Daniel's vegetable garden, the rows he'd marked out in February and never got to finish. I sat in his workshop and ran my hands over the furniture he'd been building, a dining table, half-finished oak and walnut. I finished it myself. It took me 6 weeks. It's the most beautiful piece of furniture in the house. Paul Whitfield and I met regularly about the company. Daniel had left detailed operational notes again, meticulous, thorough, his engineer's mind applied to every contingency. The company continued. The 42 employees kept their jobs. By July, we'd signed a new contract with a hospital network in Ohio. The call from Renata came on a Wednesday evening in late August. I was on the back porch, watching the light go off the creek the way it does in late summer, all gold and slow. My phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. Arthur. Her voice was different from the parking lot. Tighter, smaller. "I need to talk to you." "All right," I said. "I'm in a difficult situation." A pause. "The legal fees. Miss Breck's firm, I wasn't expecting the challenge to take as long as it did. And the accounts I had access to, the joint accounts, I spent more than I planned. I thought I was sure the trust challenge would succeed." I listened. "I know I have the dividend income from the company," she continued, "but it's quarterly, and right now I have immediate obligations. I was hoping we could talk about some kind of advance or accommodation." "Renata," I said. She stopped. "I want you to understand something." I kept my voice even. There was no anger in it. Anger had stopped being useful to me sometime around April. What Daniel built, the trust, the company structure, all of it, he built it because he loved me, and because he understood you better than you realized. He didn't do it to punish you. He did it because he was a thorough man who knew how to plan for what was coming. Silence. The dividend income is yours, as Daniel arranged. That will continue, but I won't be providing anything beyond what he structured. Arthur, I'm asking you, as we were family. You changed the door code the night after we buried him, I said. You told me it wasn't a great time when I came to collect his journals, the ones he asked me to keep. She had nothing to say to that. Take care of yourself, I said. And I meant it, in the plain sense of the words. Not warmly, not coldly, just plainly. I hung up. The creek was still catching the light. A heron was standing at the bank, the way herons do, perfectly patient, not moving at all. I watched it for a long time. There's something I should tell you about the journals. I eventually recovered them. Renata's attorney, during the discovery phase of the trust challenge, was required to provide an inventory of personal items, and Daniel's journals were listed. Gerald requested their transfer to me as items specifically designated by the deceased. She had to comply. I read them over the course of 2 weeks, in the evenings, sitting in the workshop where Daniel used to build things. In the final journal, the one he'd been writing in during his last year, there were entries from the weeks before he died. His handwriting had changed by then, looser, the letters less precise. But the thinking was still sharp. There was an entry from February, right after the diagnosis, that I have read so many times I know it from memory now. He wrote, "I keep thinking about what I'm building and what it means to build something. A bridge isn't just two pieces of land connected. It's a promise that the distance between them doesn't have to matter anymore. I want what I leave behind to be a bridge for Dad. Not a monument, not a statement, just a way for him to keep going without having to start over. He's worked hard enough. He's lost enough. He deserves to not have to fight for anything." I set the journal down when I first read that. I sat in the workshop for a long while. The half-finished table was in front of me. I picked up the sandpaper and I kept working. Daniel was right that I'd lost enough. His mother, 14 years ago. Friends, over the decades, the way you lose them. And then him, the one loss I had never let myself imagine, because some losses are simply too large to look at directly until they're already upon you. But he was also right about the other part. I didn't have to fight for anything. He'd already built it. It's been a little over a year now since I moved into the Franklin house. The vegetable garden came in well tomatoes, squash, a row of pole beans that grew so tall they needed extra stakes. I ate more vegetables this summer than I have in a decade. I can hear the creak from the bedroom window in the morning, that quiet, persistent sound of water finding its way downhill. The company is stable. Paul Whitfield runs the day-to-day operations with a competence that would have made Daniel proud. It does make Daniel proud. Somewhere. I have to believe that. I stay involved at the board level, review the quarterly numbers, show up when it matters. Renata moved to Atlanta, from what I understand. I don't think about her often. When I do, I feel something that isn't quite pity and isn't quite indifference, some combination of the two. The feeling you have for someone who made a series of choices that brought them exactly where those choices were always going to bring them. What I think about most, honestly, is the table. Oak and walnut hand-joined, finished in a satin oil that brings out the grain of the wood. It seats 8. I had Paul and his family over for dinner in September. I had Gerald and his wife. I had Daniel's 2 closest friends from college, the ones who'd known him since he was 18 and thought he was going to change the world, and were right. We sat around the table that Daniel started and I finished, and we ate and talked and laughed at stories about him, and the windows were open so you could hear the creak, and someone said, "He would have loved this," and everyone at the table nodded because it was simply true. There are losses you carry forever. There are also things that are built to last. Sometimes the same pair of hands makes both, and the question is only which one you choose to set down at the end of the day. I set down the grief when I can. I run my hand along the edge of the table, the careful join where oak meets walnut, the seam you can feel but almost can't see. He was a good builder, my son. So, I'd like to think, am I,